Hi, everybody. Wow, those are bright. So, a little bit of context before I start. I work at Envato, based in Melbourne, but community spread out everywhere. We're an organisation with community pretty much at our heart. We run marketplaces for people who sell digital things. So we need to make sure our customers are happy to spend money, to pay for the authors, to create more products, to get more customers. It's a virtuous cycle. So far we've paid almost $800 million to our creator community. I say this as context not to brag, even though I'm very proud of it, but because that I in no way want to imply that it is easy to get anything done in our community, or easy to get anything done as a representative of a community team within a company that is based around its community. So to that end, what I'm going to be talking about today is social capital. I'm going to hopefully give you three things this afternoon. The first is one of the many possible explanations of what social capital is. There are a lot of them. I'm just choosing one. The second is an understanding of the tension between two different parts of that model. They work against each other. You need to find some sort of a balance. And then the third thing are some tips that you can take to be able to apply this to be able to solve problems. So, what is social capital? To start off with, maybe think a little bit about where social capital is not. So imagine you're in a community role, you're brand new, the community's been around for a while, you've been asked to go and get people to fill out a survey, and you front up on the forums and go, "Hi guys, I'm new, could people please click this link and do this thing, guys? Anybody? Anybody?" And you find that nobody responds. Or imagine that your team in the organisation always feels like you guys are the last people to know about changes that are coming through. A restructure hits, your team evaporates overnight, and you go, "Wow, what happened there? Was there a way we could have found that out and seen that coming?" Or maybe you're in an established role in your community and you try and change the behaviour of some of your community members. And when you move in there and start doing your thing, they close ranks and they go, "No, sorry, we don't need to listen to you. We are stronger than you. The power lies in our group. So you're going to have to work harder to be able to get any change to happen." All of those situations involve some aspect of social capital. The model that I'm going to use today is very heavily based on a model called brokerage and closure from Ron Burt at the University of Chicago. I highly recommend going and reading his books and his papers if you want to know more about this. So what is social capital? Social capital, essentially, it's a theory, it's a lens, it's a way you can look at the world a little bit differently to be able to assess problems. The examples that I'm using today are specific to community builders because hopefully that's what all of us are or aspire to be, but it's generalisable to getting work done in any complex group of people, and by complex I mean more than one of them. So, what is it? Let's start with a working definition. There are as many definitions of social capital as there are people who use social capital. In my particular case today, social capital is goodwill. It's the goodwill available to individuals and groups. Where does it come from? Its source comes from the structure and the content of social relations within those groups. Content is the thing that I think everybody here is very comfortable with. How you present, what you say, the way that you have those conversations, which is why I'm not going to talk about it anymore in the rest of today's talk. I'm looking at structure, the structure of your networks. Who is connected to who? How are they connected to each other? That's the thing that often community people, as empaths and communicators, are not looking at the structural side of what they do. And I think it's useful to be able to sometimes take a step back, look at things through this particular lens, to be able to troubleshoot. If you're running into problems, if you're finding resistance, this is a way of approaching a problem to find out what kinds of resources you need more of. What's the payoff from that? Social capital. Its effects. The effects of social capital in this case come in the form of information, finding stuff out, passively or actively, influence and solidarity, being able to get people to do the things that you want them to, or getting people to support you when you've decided what you're going to do. Between those three things, a lot of the problems, all three of the scenarios that I talked through a minute ago, are all because that people don't have access to enough of at least one of these. So the model that I'm looking at has two different parts. I call them bridging and bonding social capital. Bridging social capital, the first one, What is it about? It's about weak ties, friends of friends. It's about spanning boundaries between different groups. It's what people talk about when they say we should be breaking down silos in this organisation, because the more that people spend time in a group, the more they take on the behaviours of other people in that group. They homogenise. They also, as well as acting the same, they'll start getting access to the same sorts of information. This is what we refer to in terms of a filter bubble. The people you hang around with, you like hanging out with them because they're more like you. They know the sorts of things that you already knew. In terms of weak ties, Mark Granovetter in early 1980s did a study looking at how likely people were to land jobs on recommendations from different sorts of peer contacts. Your weak ties, your friends of friends, are far more likely to refer the job to you that you will end up getting than your immediate close circle of friends, because your immediate circle, they all know the same things. They have the same skills, the same expertise. Those jobs are full. The place you get the valuable information, in that sense, finding out about jobs that you might be interested in doing or that might be interested in hiring you, come from further out. In terms of what it looks like, some of you here would have seen me speaking last year about generating network graphs. I am not doing that today. I am showing network graphs, but network graphs here, they are the icing, they're not the cake. They're a handy visual shorthand to be able to say this group of people are kind of like each other and they're not as much like that group of people over there. So please, don't get scared when you see squiggles and lines and dots all over the screens. This is a network graph. Every dot is a person, every line is a connection of some sort between people on that graph. The colours are different clusters. They're groups of people that are more like the other people in that group than they are like people across in other groups. So when we're looking at bridging capital, who's connected to multiple groups here? That one in the middle there. If you don't know that person in your community, you may be that person. If you're not that person, find them. Make friends with them. Bridging capital works by a brokerage mechanism. There is unequal access to information. Different groups of people know different things. It's a property called structural holes. There are different resources that will simply not be available in some parts of that network. So the people who are at bridging points can be the brokers of that information to come through. It helps us do a lot of things, mostly information-based. You can find out what's going on. Having an ear to the ground, being able to listen to your contacts. You need the right contacts to be listening to, otherwise you're just going to be listening to the same stuff that you already knew. So passive information, active information seeking, going to talk to people and asking people to get answers, being able to access the right people to ask those questions to. It also lets us share information. And that's an important thing about social capital. Social capital is not the same as something like financial capital that you can put aside in a bank vault and hopefully it will be worth at least as much as when you turned your back on it 10 years ago. Social capital degrades. It requires active investment to be able to keep it going. But it can still be used to access other resources, which is why you use an economic model to describe it. Sharing information is good. Using your social capital is good because going out and using it, the activities that you take to use and generate social capital contribute to generating more social capital. And if you have a lot of it, and you are working with people in your team who don't have as much of it, you're in a privileged position. What you should be doing there is using your privilege to be able to lift other people up alongside you. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to some tips at the end. The other side of this is bonding capital. So bonding capital is the opposite. Bonding capital is about strong ties. It's about being embedded inside a group, having lots of redundant connections, lots of different pathways that can take you from person A to person B. Going back to the network from before, are the people here who have good bonding capital? Who's well connected? Well, you might start looking at people like that one in the circle there. That person, whoever they are, in terms of bonding capital, fantastic. They're connected to more than 3/4 of the people in their network directly. Indirectly, they're connected to every single person in their network. What they're not so good at is access to anything outside of their network. So this is probably the person who is very able to get stuff done within their group, but they might not know what stuff they need to be doing. There's a tension between those two. The more you lean to either end of that spectrum, the more you are turning your back on the resources at the other side. That's not a bad thing. Just be aware of it so that you can say, what problem do I have? What kinds of resources do I need more of? What types of activities, what types of network building activities, what types of communication activities should I be doing more of to get access to the part of the resource that I'm missing? So bonding capital works by a closure mechanism. Multiple connections all reinforce each other. What this does is it helps build trust. It helps build trust by increasing the consequences if you share bad information. We all like to assume that everybody is nice and playing nice and trying to collaborate. That's not always going to be the case. Maybe it's intentional, maybe it's accidental that the information coming through is flawed in some way. It's more likely that somebody else will have access to the same information so they can check the validity of that information and go, oh, that's not quite what I heard. Let's double check that. Or if you're bringing in a new idea, having multiple people who can go, oh yeah, I vouch for this person, instead of, who are you again? Why are you bringing this idea into our group? Why should we be working on this? Being able to have multiple people who can back you up when you turn up in front of them and you say, I have some information that I think will be useful to you. So, close ties help to create trust. It gives us access to the other two of those resources from this type of social capital, influence and solidarity. So, getting people to side with you. And redundant connections will help to reinforce social norms. You have more and more people who are acting more and more like each other. In terms of tips and tactics, I'm just checking my time because I think I'm rushing through. Tips and tactics. How do you actually apply this? It's fine to know a theory. It's fine to have access to lots of different theories. Ideally, each of them is a different way of looking at a problem. You're never going to be always trying to solve problems through exactly the same lens all of the time. So instead, understanding what you do now about the tension between the two, about the value of different types of behaviour within a network, think about how you might go about using those and the sorts of problems that you might face in your community, trying to launch a new program in your community, trying to get people on board with a redesign, changing anything in your community. Communities love having things changed. Think about how things work within your organisation. You might be a team of 1. You might be a team of 10 people. Your team might be part of a composite team that has a whole lot of different roles. How do you get access to the information you need to solve problems, to identify what the problems are and find what sorts of solutions they need? And then once you have that information, how do you get buy-in from other people? Going back to the example from bridging capital, if you're the person who is so well connected with everything else that you're almost not connected at all to your own organisation, do you think that you'll have an easy time saying, hey, executive team, we really need to change basically everything that we're doing with our community because that I've got all this fantastic information about what we should be doing differently? You're probably going to struggle at that point. On the other hand, if you're really deeply embedded in a group, you might be able to get them to do whatever it is that you think is important to do, but you don't know what the best solutions are. So, tip number 1, understand your environment. No community is homogeneous. Envato does not have a community, which I say as one of the people in Envato's community team. We have a bunch of communities. Sometimes it's easy to see where the boundaries are. Our communities, at a broad level, we have customers and we have authors on our marketplaces. At a more granular level, our authors split up by marketplace. Those people work quite differently. Our videographers are very different to our audio people, very different to our developers, very different to our graphic designers. Within each of those, you can keep breaking it down further. Our graphic designers from Portugal talk together, operate in a very different way to our graphic designers from Jakarta. The more that you can kind of identify where the edges are, which is where if you do have access to tools to be able to generate these maps, fantastic. If you don't, just apply this in terms of how you think about who's talking to who, what are they saying, whereabouts in your community are they congregating? Are they on your site? Are they elsewhere? We have a lot of Russian-speaking authors who have built their own kind of offshoot community on vk.com, which we try and keep a lazy eye on. Mostly we rely on people who can actually read Russian to be able to tell us what's going on in that community. But have a sense of what your environment looks like. What is the lay of the land? How many subgroups are there? And which of those groups are you in or can you reasonably get access to? That's not just in your community. Think of it in terms of your organisation. Does your community team sit as part of communications, as part of marketing, your PR function? How well connected are you to be able to find information about product changes, about changes in legal and compliance, in accounting and finance, in all of the other areas of your organisation? Envato is a very engineering-led organisation. We have about a third of our staff are engineers, so I spend a lot of time inviting myself into other people's meetings to be able to talk about community with them. Or fortunately these days getting invited into their meetings to talk about community. But understand how many different groups there are, what sorts of things those groups know. Because the second tip is find the right balance to be able to do the job that you need to do. Bridging and bonding capital are going to work in opposition to each other. The more that you do of one, the less you are doing of the other. So make sure that you're not super committing to doing just one thing and one thing well, because that you will be degrading your own access to social capital by doing that. When you are presented with a problem, which should happen in a community role like maybe once every 3 minutes or so, look at that problem. Figure out how big is the problem, how urgent, how relevant is the problem. What do I need to be able to solve this problem? Can I hand this on to somebody else? Is this a thing I need to handle myself? If I need to handle it myself, what do I need to be able to move to the next step of resolving this? If part of that problem is that you don't have access to information, and less in the immediate solving of a problem sense, more in the positioning yourself within your community, think about how you can better position yourself to span boundaries. Understand that brokerage effects exist. Make sure you can enter the groups, you can make contacts in the different groups where you can either passively find out about what's going on so that you can preempt problems before they happen, or so that you have access to deep expertise to be able to resolve problems as they come up. Identify what your information blind spots are. We all have them. There is absolutely no shame in saying this, and this are things that I really know absolutely nothing about. The thing that is a problem is if you go, oh well, so that's too hard, I guess I'll never learn that. Anything can be learned if you are in the right place and you have access to the right resources. Find where the sources of information are that you need to solve the sorts of problems you consistently face in your role. Spend 2 weeks, spend 6 months in any community role, in any community team around the world, and you will have a pretty good sense of the types of problems that will keep coming back every week, every month, throughout the lifetime of that community. Once you know what the common problems are, you can start finding shortcuts to be able to solve them. This is kind of tying in with the concept some of you will have seen earlier from Rich, this indispensable community manager. Become more indispensable over time. This is excellent job security. Be the person who is able to connect people within your organisation or within your community. You don't have to know the answers to all of the problems, but it really helps if you know the best starting point to find those answers. So locate information sources that you need and find or negotiate access to the places in your community that you need to be. Plan on using closure effects as well. So don't go all out finding information because you'll find that your ability to act on that information is degraded. Spend time hands-on in your community. Doesn't matter what level you are. Find the bit of community that you need to interact with, whether that's within your organisation or in the public-facing part of your community, and spend time there. Talk to people. Get involved in social threads and discussions. Share memes about how terrible it is getting tracks through the Audio Jungle review queue. And use your influence to be able to help other people who are less established than you. This is something that we've been doing a bit of at Envato. We find that people who are embedded in the community are more efficient at getting work done in the community. Not a surprise to anybody in this room. Very surprising to people who are not community people, who've spent too many months turning up to the community and saying, you need to do this for me, and then this, and then this, and why is nobody ever responding to the questionnaire or the survey or commenting on my post? You can use your influence to help those people get established in the community. If you're the visible face of your community, ideally you want this to scale. You don't want everything to be using you as the point of failure to getting work done in that community. Mentor those people, introduce them, turn up in a thread, say, hey, I'm Ben, you guys know me, most of you know me, you know what I do. I'd like to introduce my colleague. This is my colleague. He works in the affiliate section of our business. He's amazing at his job. This is his area of expertise. Here's how he can help you. I'm going to hand over to him now because he's going to ask a couple of questions. Make it so that there is some context so people who understand who you are, who are connected to you, can share those connections out. And also, last point, remember that social capital is partially a shared resource. I put partly in parentheses there because that I want to talk a little bit about having it as a shared resource and a little bit about not sharing. The work that you do creates a valuable asset for your entire organisation. It is worth investing the time in doing this because this is not a way of solving the problem you face today. This is building social infrastructure that will help you to solve problems more effectively for the duration of your time in that community. It's an asset for the whole organisation. Trust is great. Trust is a buffer. Trust is the thing that allows the community to ride out the rough stages as changes are being enacted on them and not all leave or riot or burn the place down. If you say, hang on, bear with us for a minute, we will improve things, you need people to trust you, otherwise they're just going to leave. But if it's an asset for the whole organisation, that means that other people can be spending that asset. Be careful because this is going to happen. You will put a lot of time in. I talk to a lot of people in community teams who say, yeah, all that we do is we just build, and then another department goes and spends and spends and spends. Make them aware of what they're doing. But my last point there is that it is only partly a shared resource. No matter how good the community is, the relationship between your organisation and the community, no matter how strongly embedded your community team is in that community, if you're new, if you come in from another department, from a different facet of that community team, you can't assume that all of that resource is yours. You can absolutely share in it, and hopefully they will help share with you to be able to lift you up as well, but you need to put in the work yourself to make those contacts, to find out who you need to be talking to find out who can help you with problems, to find out where problems are being solved by people in your community. So by all means, put the time in. It's worth it. It is a valuable thing that your organisation will benefit from, but also don't ride on other people's coattails. Everybody in your team, however senior, however junior, should be putting some amount of time into doing this because this is the way that you get things done in a community. And that's all I have time for today.